If someone had told her that jealousy could make girls dig a hole just to bury her, she would have laughed. But looking back now, she understood. Envy wears the softest smile and speaks in the sweetest tone before it strikes. Her name was Liora. In her small village, people called her the beauty of the gods. She never asked for that name. She never wanted attention. But from the moment she was old enough to carry a water pot to the stream, the world noticed her before she even noticed herself. She was her parents' only child. They weren't rich, just humble farmers surrounded by yam ridges and cassava fields. Her mother had a laugh that could lighten even the hardest day. Her father was a quiet man who believed the silence could solve anything. Life wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful, until other people's opinions began shaping her reality. The trouble began gradually. Whenever she walked past the village square, some girls would giggle and whisper. At first, she thought nothing of it, but one afternoon at the stream, she heard one of them hiss, "See how she walks like she owns the whole village just because she's pretty." Liora turned to see them, Ariel, Mina, and Ruth, three girls who moved like a pack. Their eyes held a mix of amusement and venom. Liora smiled awkwardly, hoping kindness would soften them, but it didn't. From that day, she became their favorite topic. "Beauty is not an achievement," they would sneer. "You think the prince will marry you just because your skin shines?" Sometimes they would mimic her walk behind her back. Liora would go home pretending she didn't care, but once her door closed, the tears came. Her mother always noticed. "My daughter," she would say, gently brushing her hair, "even sweet honey attracts jealous flies. Don't dim your light because others can't handle it." The words helped, but the pain remained. Being beautiful in a small village felt more like a curse. One day, after a particularly cruel round of teasing, Liora begged her mother to let her skip market day. Her mother agreed, thinking rest might help, but the absence only made things worse. The girls began calling her Snake Girl and Spirit Child, whispering that her beauty must have come from dark magic. Soon, even villagers who once greeted her warmly began avoiding her. Her mother was furious when she heard the rumors. "They will not destroy my child's name because of jealousy," she vowed. But her father, as always, advised calm. People talk. Let them talk. Still, it was hard to ignore even the village children snickering behind her back. After a while, her mother stopped sending her to the market altogether. Liora stayed home, cooking or helping on the farm. But isolation only made her lonelier. Through the bamboo fence, she often saw the girls walking together, chatting and singing. She longed for friendship, belonging. Then everything changed. The town crier announced that the prince was ready to choose a wife. There would be a grand dance at the palace, and every unmarried girl was invited. Excitement filled the village. Girls practiced dance steps. Mothers sewed new wrappers. Liora didn't plan to go. She knew what awaited her, mockery. But her mother insisted. "Don't let fear cage your destiny," she said. "Who knows? The gods may smile on you." So Liora prepared quietly. She borrowed a beautiful wrapper from her mother and wore a cowrie necklace her mother gifted her. "You look like a queen," her mother said proudly. But while Liora dreamed of a magical night, others were plotting her downfall. Ariel, Mina, and Ruth met at the stream. "Do you think Liora will come?" Mina asked. "She better not," Ruth muttered. "If she shows up, the prince won't look at anyone else." "Then we make sure she doesn't," Ariel replied coldly. Their plan began with pretending to befriend her. Days later, they arrived at her home with roasted nuts and fruit, smiling sweetly. They apologized for everything and said they had grown up and wanted to be friends. Liora nearly fainted from shock. Her mother didn't buy it. "Be careful, Liora. Snakes don't change. They shed skin." But Leora's lonely heart desperately wanted to believe them. Soon they visited daily, braiding her hair, laughing with her, complimenting her dance steps. Slowly, she trusted them again. One afternoon, she showed them her outfit for the dance. "You look like a goddess," Ruth said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Liora didn't notice. Wolves often admire their prey before they strike. The girls met later that day and whispered their plan: dig a deep pit in the bush and lure Liora there on the day of the ceremony. For days they toiled with shovels and hoes until the hole was deep enough to trap her. The morning of the dance arrived. Her mother hugged her tightly. "Don't follow anyone," she warned. "Go straight to the palace. I had a strange dream." Liora promised she'd be careful. A few hours later, just as the morning sun softened into the warm gold of a late afternoon, Liora heard footsteps approaching her family compound. Ariel, Mina, and Ruth appeared at the entrance, wrapped in brightly colored Nigerian wrappers that shimmered like blossoming flowers. Their skin glowed under the sunlight, their hair neatly braided, and their smiles overly wide, as if they had rehearsed them. "Liora!" Ariel called out with a cheerful sing-song voice that floated through the air like a deceptive melody. "Come, walk with us. We want to arrive at the palace together. We'll take a shortcut through the bush so no one sees our clothes before the dance." Liora froze for a moment, her fingers tightening around her wrapper. Something inside her stirred, a flicker of doubt, a soft whisper warning her to remain cautious. She hesitated, her eyes darting from one girl to the other, searching for sincerity. Mina rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, please, Liora. Don't tell me you're listening to old women's superstitions. You're acting scared for nothing." Ruth stepped forward with a gentle smile, tilting her head like someone offering comfort. "We're friends now, remember? Why would we harm you? Let's go together." Their words were sweet, their faces innocent, their laughter light, but beneath it all, a faint shadow lingered, something Liora couldn't quite name. Her heart whispered, "Don't go," but her lonely mind pleaded, "Maybe they've changed. Maybe they mean it this time." So she nodded, and that small, fragile nod sealed her fate. The girls clapped joyfully, linking arms with her as they stepped out of the compound. They walked together through the village, chatting about the dance, the prince, and what the palace might look like inside. For the first time in months, Liora allowed herself to relax. Their laughter surrounded her like a warm blanket, and the weight she'd been carrying quietly began to lift. She started to believe, just a little, that the tide had turned. They entered the bush path, sunlight filtering through tall palm trees and thick leaves overhead. The earthy smell of damp soil filled the air. They walked deeper, their sandals brushing against fallen leaves. The girls kept up their lively chatter, and Liora found herself responding, smiling, even laughing softly. But gradually, something changed. The path narrowed, the air thickened, the breeze stilled. Not a single bird sang, not a leaf moved. A silence so unnatural crept over the forest that even Leora's breath seemed too loud. A chill crawled slowly across her back, raising the tiny hairs on her skin. Her steps faltered. "Why is it so quiet?" she whispered. Ariel glanced back at her, her lips curving into an unreadable smile. "We're almost there. Come this way, Liora. This path is smoother." She pointed toward a narrow path partially hidden by overgrown grass. Leora's heartbeat quickened. Something felt wrong, but Ariel's voice was calm, coaxing, reassuring. So Liora stepped toward the path, and the ground disappeared beneath her. The earth split open like a hungry mouth. Leora's scream tore through the trees as she plunged into darkness. She hit the bottom with a thud that exploded pain through her legs. Dirt rained over her. Her palms scraped against rough earth as she tried to lift herself. Her head spun. The world blurred. She looked up and saw them. Ariel, Mina, Ruth, standing at the edge of the pit, perfectly aligned, like three shadows cast by the same wicked flame. Their smiles had changed. Sharp now, cold, triumphant. Ariel leaned forward slightly, eyes glinting. Dance there. Village beauty. Their laughter rolled down like stones hitting the earth, echoing in the hollow pit. They turned away casually, chatting as they walked, leaving Liora in darkness. Liora screamed until her throat burned raw. She clawed at the crumbling walls until her fingers bled. She called for her mother, for anyone, for the gods. But the night swallowed her voice. When the sun set, the pit grew colder, and fear wrapped itself around her like a suffocating shroud. She realized, in that moment of crushing silence, that she was completely alone. No one knew where she was. No one was coming. At the palace, her mother waited with bright eyes, scanning every maiden's face, expecting to see her daughter appear glowing in her borrowed wrapper. But as the night deepened and Liora never arrived, her mother's heart tightened. She questioned the girls, but they shrugged and lied with ease. Panic surged through her chest. She rushed home, only to find that her husband had not seen Liora either. Fear consumed them. They returned to the palace breathless, reporting her disappearance to the king, who immediately dispatched guards. They searched every corner of the village, but the night hid Liora well. Her mother didn't sleep, not a second, crying silent, trembling prayers into the darkness. Liora screamed until her throat burned raw, her voice cracking against the unfeeling walls of the pit as she clawed desperately at the crumbling earth until her fingers bled, calling out for her mother, for anyone, even for the gods who watched over the village. But the night, thick and merciless, swallowed every echo of her pain. As the sun disappeared and the darkness wrapped itself tightly around the forest, the air inside the pit grew colder, sinking its icy fingers into her bones. Fear settled over her like a suffocating shroud, pressing into her ribs until she could barely breathe, and in that crushing silence, she understood with stark, devastating clarity that she was completely alone, that no one knew where she was, and that no one was coming to save her. Meanwhile, at the palace, her mother waited with bright, hopeful eyes, scanning every maiden who entered, certain that her daughter would appear at any moment in her borrowed wrapper glowing like sunrise. But as the evening stretched into night, and Leora's face never emerged from the crowd, her mother's heart tightened with dread. She questioned Ariel, Mina, and Ruth, only to receive careless shrugs and lies as smooth as oil, and panic surged through her chest so violently that she rushed home in terror, only to find that her husband had not seen Liora either. Fear gripped them like a storm, and together they raced back to the palace, breathless and trembling, reporting their daughter's disappearance to the king, who immediately dispatched guards across the village and surrounding bush. They searched tirelessly, but the night hid Liora well, and her mother did not sleep, not even a heartbeat, whispering trembling prayers into the darkness until the first hints of dawn touched the sky. At daybreak, Darius, a strong hunter known for his sharp ears and steady steps, ventured into the forest to track game. But as he moved through the thick undergrowth, he heard a faint, broken voice drifting between the trees, a voice pleading, "Help, please, someone, help me." He froze, listened intently, then followed the desperate cries through the tangled bush until he reached the edge of the deep pit. When he looked down and saw Liora, weak, filthy, trembling, and barely able to lift her head, his expression hardened into determined resolve, as he lowered a rope, pulled her out with steady hands, gave her water, and without a moment's hesitation, carried her straight to the palace. When Leora's parents arrived and saw her alive, battered but breathing, they collapsed around her in overwhelming relief, and through tears, she poured out the horror of everything she had endured. The king's face darkened with a fury that shook the courtyard. He summoned the entire village, calling Ariel, Mina, and Ruth to stand before him as their eyes dropped to the ground and their bodies trembled. They denied everything at first, their voices thin and shaking, but under the king's fierce, piercing gaze, sharp like a spear, one of them finally broke, confessing through hot, uncontrollable tears that jealousy had consumed them, that they had grown up hearing constant comparisons to Liora, that they had wished only to scare her, but their envy had turned vicious and poisonous. But their apology came far too late. The king, unmoved, pronounced a harsh sentence. They would be imprisoned for many years, and when released, no one in the village would be permitted to speak to them, trade with them, or offer them shelter ever again. Their shame would follow them like a relentless shadow for the rest of their lives. Then, just as the courtyard fell silent under the weight of judgment, the prince stepped forward and declared, with a deep, resonant voice that echoed against the palace walls, "I have found my bride." Gasps rippled through the crowd like wind stirring tall grass as the prince crossed the space between them, took Leora's hands gently, lifted her to her feet, brushed the dirt tenderly from her dress, and drew her into an embrace so warm and steady that it melted the last remnants of fear from her bones. The crowd erupted in joyous cheers. The jealous girls lowered their heads in shame as guards led them away, and Darius received a reward fit for a hero. And so, despite every trap laid for her, despite every shadow cast over her path, Leora's destiny rose higher than her enemies could ever reach, shining like a flame that envy itself could not extinguish.